Have you ever seen a child stop talking because their heart was broken in a way adults could never understand? Ethan Ward, a powerful billionaire, once thought money could solve everything, but no amount of money could make his son, 6-year-old Noah, say a single word since the day his mother died. The 1,000-square-foot house still had lights on at night, but inside was silence and cold loneliness. Then, one day, Grace Miller, a woman with sad eyes and gentle hands, entered the house. She not only cared for the child, but also, little by little, reawakened the breath in the silent heart. But Grace's dark past soon returned, forcing Ethan to choose continue to hide in the world of power and control, or dare to step out to protect the woman who made his son smile again. If it were you, when faced with loss, fear, and a second chance in life, would you choose to love or continue to run away? Because sometimes what hurts us the most is not what we have lost, but what we do not dare to hold on to. The story, Who Hurt You? Mommy. When a silent child uttered what woke up the father's whole world is a journey of love, courage, and healing. If you ever believed that every broken heart can beat again, please like, share, and subscribe because the miracle is starting now. They say time heals all wounds, but in Ethan Ward's 12,000-square-foot mansion, time only makes the silence more deafening. Mornings in Greenwich were always peaceful. The sun slid through the maple trees outside the gate, casting a pale yellow light on the pale gray limestone walls. On the second floor, the wind tapped against the window frames as if someone were knocking, but no one answered. Ethan sat in the kitchen, his coffee long gone cold. He looked at the polished granite countertop, which reflected the tired face of a 43-year-old man once admired around the world. His eyes were sunken, his lips were dry, and his expensive suit did nothing to improve his appearance. Since his wife, Clara, died in the accident, this house is no longer a home. It is a museum of memories, everything frozen in the moment before life took a turn. The wedding photo still hung on the living room wall. The dried carnations were pressed into a glass frame. At the dining table, Noah's little chair was still neatly placed beside him, but empty. For 8 months, Noah had not said a word, not a sound, not a laugh. Therapists were called in. Top psychiatrists were flown in from New York. Everyone said, this is post-traumatic stress disorder. He needs time, but time is what Ethan fears the most, because it is eaten away at him day by day, hour by hour. He used to be the man who controlled everything: stock prices, deals, people. But now he can't get a 6-year-old to call him Dad. Noah still sat there, every day, in the pale blue room, looking out the window at the back garden. He didn't smile, didn't cry. He just quietly hugged the old teddy bear his mother had given him, his eyes following the swaying leaves. Ethan stepped in several times, placing his hand on the boy's shoulder, but the boy just pulled back slightly, as if afraid to touch the adult's sadness. He understood. The child had lost its mother right before his eyes, and he, because of a work call, was not there. That truth was the sentence he had given himself. Every night, when the clock strikes 2 a.m., he's still sitting in his home office, the light from his monitor reflecting off his tense face. On his desk, piles of papers pile up like a wall to cover up the emptiness in his heart. One night, when the security system clicked, he looked at the camera screen and saw Noah walking down the hall, dragging his teddy bear. He stopped outside his mother's room, touched the doorknob, and walked away. Nothing. That was all. Ethan felt his heart constrict. He couldn't cry anymore. His tears seemed to have run out the night he saw Clara off. The next morning, he came to Noah and placed a small toy plane on the table. "I miss you, my child," he said hoarsely. Noah did not look at him, just turned the plane's wings slightly, then fell silent again. Ethan sighed. He wasn't angry, just hurt. He knew the child was lost in his own dark place, a place he couldn't find his way into. The days passed like this, each hour and minute tinged with regret. Inside the house, everything was running on schedule. The stove turned on automatically. The sensor lights lit up when he walked by, but all he felt was that he was living in a tomb with light. On Saturday evening, the butler suggested hiring a new nanny. "We've tried 3, Mr. Ward, but none of them have held up." Ethan just nodded, unconcerned. He had stopped believing in promises of healing. But a few days later, when the woman walked through the black iron gate, carrying an old suitcase and a gentle smile, Ethan felt his heart waver. The woman's name was Grace Miller. She didn't introduce herself at length, didn't try to sound knowledgeable. She just bowed slightly and said softly, "Hello, Mr. Ward. I can't promise to make Noah talk again, but I'll be here if he needs someone who won't leave." Ethan just nodded silently. He didn't believe anyone could break down that wall, but something in the woman's eyes made him not turn away immediately. The first afternoon, she didn't say much, didn't ask any questions. She just sat on the living room floor, opened a comic book, and began to read to no one in particular. Her voice was steady, light as the wind. Noah stood on the steps, watching silently. He didn't come down, nor did he leave. Ethan, from behind the glass door, stayed longer than he intended. It had been a long time since there had been a sound in this house. Not a door closing, not the air conditioner, but the sound of a real human voice trying to bring life back. That night, Ethan lay in bed, unable to sleep. He had no idea who the woman was, or why she'd kept his eyes on the security screen. But inside him, for the first time in months, something small, fragile but real, stirred. A vague hope that maybe the silence isn't forever. Monday morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains onto the light wood floor. The house was still chilly, but somehow different. The scent of baking bread wafted through the air. Ethan walked downstairs to find the kitchen no longer empty. Grace stood at the stove, her hair tied back, wearing a pale shirt, carefully buttering a slice of bread. No rush, no hesitation. Her movements had an unnatural slowness, like someone used to living in silent houses. "Do you want coffee?" she asked, her voice soft as a breath. Ethan looked surprised, then nodded slightly. He sat down on the chair without saying anything more. Noah walked in, his teddy bear in his arms. He paused at the door, his eyes on the plate of bread on the table. Grace didn't call or press. She just smiled and pushed the plate to the edge of the table, where he could reach it. The boy slowly approached and sat down. Ethan watched the scene, his heart stopping. There was no magic, just a very real moment of silence. All morning, Grace did nothing but tidy up a few dead potted plants, clean the window frames, and occasionally hum a very old tune, the "You Are My Sunshine" that Clara used to sing to Noah. Noah raised his head at the sound. He didn't speak, but his eyes seemed to light up a little. Ethan stood in the hallway, suddenly feeling a lump in his throat. That evening, as she was cleaning the living room, He approached and said, "You know that song." Grace turned around, smiling slightly. "I used to teach kindergarten. A little girl taught me to sing it again when I lost my voice for a while." Ethan looked slightly surprised. "You lost your voice?" Grace nodded slightly. "Yes, when everything in life is too loud. Sometimes the body shuts itself off to be quiet." He was silent. For a moment, he realized that they had something in common, two people who had been silenced by pain. In the days that followed, Grace never asked Noah anything. "No? Do you miss me?" "No. Why aren't you talking?" She just showed up regularly, reading books, making milk, walking around the garden. Noah began to follow her, first a few steps, then a whole day. He loved watching her water the plants and sitting on the steps watching her fix broken things. One time, while Grace was mowing, the lawnmower screeched to a halt. Ethan ran to help, but she just said, "It's okay," and bent down. As he walked closer, he saw that her hand had an old scar, small and faint, along her wrist. He didn't ask. She didn't explain. That evening, Ethan opened his laptop, but he couldn't concentrate. In his mind was the image of that woman, quiet yet resilient, as if she had learned to stand in the wind without falling. On the fifth day, he found Noah sitting with Grace on the carpet, drawing with colored chalk. "What is this?" Grace asked softly, enough for him to hear but not forced to answer. Noah picked up the green chalk and drew a curve. It was a sun. She smiled. "It's beautiful." He didn't say anything, just bent down and continued. Ethan watched from afar. Every little movement the boy made, every glance, was like a tiny crack in the wall of silence he had once despaired of. That night, he played back the security camera footage. The two of them sat in the living room, not saying a word, just drawing and smiling softly. He watched it over and over again. For the first time, he didn't understand why he did it. But inside, there was a strange feeling, both relief and pain. The next day, as Grace was about to leave, he stopped her. "How did you get it to stay?" She replied simply, "I didn't do anything. I just didn't leave." That sentence made Ethan silent for a long time. He never thought that sometimes the most ordinary presence could be the most precious thing in a house that was too familiar with loss. In the evening, he placed a cup of tea in front of her as a thank you. She nodded slightly, her eyes sparkling in the yellow light. As he left the room, Grace's voice rang out behind him. "You know, sometimes kids don't need anyone to tell them everything's going to be okay. They just need to see that adults don't give up." Ethan stopped, not turning around, but pressing his lips together. For the first time, he found himself wanting to believe that the house could be warm again. Night fell. The sky outside was full of stars. Inside, the light in Noah's room was still on, where he sat next to Grace, engrossed in recoloring the sun he had left unfinished. In that space, silence was no longer scary. It became the gentlest sound Ethan had ever known. October in Greenwich was starting to get chilly. A light mist drifted across the back garden in the morning, covering the maple trees in a white mist. Small footsteps echoed on the wet gravel. Slowly, stopping by the old wooden swing where Clara used to love to sit with Noah every afternoon. Now, on that swing, Grace sat with the boy. She swayed gently, holding a steaming cup of cocoa, while Noah was drawing something in a small notebook. Ethan stood in the kitchen doorway, looking out through the glass. He had been standing there for nearly 10 minutes without realizing it. The scene was so peaceful that he did not dare do anything to disturb it. Noah was using a blue crayon to draw a woman standing next to a boy. There were no clear lines, just a rough shape, but Ethan knew it wasn't Clara. The long, low-tied hair belonged to Grace. He suddenly felt something rising in his chest, warm and painful. At noon, while Grace was clearing the dishes, Ethan asked quietly, "Is Noah starting to draw more often?" She nodded, her eyes shining with joy. He's finding his own way of speaking again, not with words, but with colors. Ethan smiled. "Thank you." Grace shook her head and said softly, "I'm just here, like you." That simple sentence made him silent. He didn't know since when he started paying attention to every word she said. That afternoon, he was working in his home office, but instead of looking at the screen, he kept looking out the window, where he heard a soft chuckle, a sound he thought he had lost forever. Grace was teaching Noah how to make cookies. Flour was all over her shirt, and Noah was smiling, a short but genuine smile. Ethan stood up, headed for the door, then paused. A strange feeling washed over him. He wanted to join in, to enter that small world, but fear held him back. He was afraid of messing things up. At night, he sat in his study, holding a glass of wine but not drinking. The desk lamp reflected his shadow on the wall. Sometimes it is in the quiet that people hear their own thoughts most clearly. He wondered, do I still know what love is? The question popped up, without an answer. Outside in the hallway, Noah's small footsteps echoed. Ethan opened the door and saw his son standing there holding the drawing. He didn't say anything, just held it out. The drawing shows 3 people, a man, a woman, and a child holding their hands. Above is a bright sun shining across the page. Ethan took it, not daring to ask. The boy just looked at him with his clear eyes, then turned away. At that moment, the father's heart felt like it was being squeezed. He put the drawing on the table and looked at it for a long time. The next day, he decided to do something he hadn't done in 8 months. He left work early to go home. Grace was reading with Noah in the living room when he entered. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, casting soft orange hues on the wooden floor. The sight made him feel strangely at peace. Grace looked up, a little surprised to see him back so early. "You're back already?" Ethan nodded and replied softly, "I want to have dinner with you 2. For the first time, they sat at a table, the 3 of them. No fancy dinner, no wine, just simple pasta and salad. Noah ate slowly, but didn't leave. During the meal, Grace told a few stories about her old school, where she used to teach. Her voice was warm and natural. Ethan looked at her as she spoke, then at his son, who was listening. He noticed that the fear in his son's eyes had faded. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Ethan opened the door and stepped out into the garden. It was colder, his breath turned into mist. He looked up at Noah's window, where the yellow nightlight was still on. He wondered if his child would ever know that it was a strange woman who taught him to start over. Grace's voice came from the next room, her voice softly singing an old lullaby. Ethan stood still, his eyes closed. It's been a long time since he felt this house was really lived in. On Friday evening, the house was quiet, a characteristic of autumn. A light wind swept through the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and rotting maple leaves. In the living room, the firelight reflected on the faces of 3 people, Ethan, Grace, and Noah. Noah was stacking blocks of wood into a small castle. Grace sat beside him, reading a fairy tale, her voice soft as mist. Ethan just sat quietly, listening to the crackle of the fire, his eyes occasionally glancing at her. Outside, it suddenly began to rain. The rain pattered on the kitchen roof, steady as a heartbeat. Grace looked up and smiled. "I like the sound of rain," she said. "It's like heaven's apology." Ethan chuckled softly, but his eyes never left that face, a face that was both gentle and somehow always contained an indescribable sadness. When the story ended, Noah rubbed his eyes and leaned his head on Grace's shoulder. She sang softly, without music, just a string of soft, rustic notes that made Ethan feel a lump in his throat. It's been a long time since this house has had singing. When Noah fell asleep, Ethan gently carried him upstairs. Returning downstairs, he found Grace packing away books, the firelight casting a warm glow over her hair. "Thank you," he said softly. She looked up, smiling weakly. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just here for Noah." "No." Ethan paused, his voice hoarse. "Me too." That moment, their eyes met, a brief second, but filled with so many unspoken words. Grace turned away quickly, but her hands were shaking slightly. Ethan noticed. He wanted to ask, but held back. He knew there were pains that couldn't be asked, only shared. The next day, Ethan went on a short business trip in the morning. When he returned, he found the house unusually quiet. There was no sound of reading, no sound of footsteps. He walked quickly into the living room and stopped dead. Grace was sitting on the floor by the window. Her head bowed, the afternoon light shone through, revealing long bruises down her arms. Noah stood beside her, his eyes red, clutching his teddy bear. Ethan approached, his voice soft but firm. "What happened?" Grace jumped, quickly pulling her sleeve down. "It's nothing. I just tripped." "You're lying," Ethan said, his voice low but cold. "Who did it?" Noah suddenly spoke up, his voice trembling, weak but clear. She was crying. Ethan froze. It was the first time in nearly 8 months that he had heard his son's voice. The room froze for a moment. Grace spun around, tears welling in her eyes. Ethan knelt down and placed his hands on Noah's shoulders, his voice trembling. "You just said, did you really say that Noah didn't answer?" He just turned around, hugged Grace, and said in a choked voice, "Don't be sad, miss." The words hit every wall Ethan had ever built. He looked at the two people, a child just finding her voice, and a woman trembling in grief, and suddenly he was no longer a billionaire, no longer the ruler of any world. He was just a human, witnessing the truest love he had ever seen. He sat down on the floor and said softly, "Grace, tell me, who did this to you?" She shook her head slightly, her lips pressed together. "No one, just the past." Ethan was silent. In the flickering firelight, he saw something deep in her eyes, not fear, but shame. The shame of someone who had endured so much and still tried to maintain her dignity. He didn't ask any more questions. He just said, softly but firmly, "I don't know what happened, but I promise, under this roof, no one will ever make you afraid again." Grace looked up, staring at him longer than usual. Maybe she wanted to believe him, but didn't have the courage. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat in his office, opening the employee file she'd filled out when she first arrived. An old address in Newark, a shaky handwriting, no next of kin. He felt his heart tighten. With the instinct of a man who had built an empire on finding the truth, Ethan called his old friend in the private security team. "Find me everything you can about Grace Miller, but please, don't let her know." 3 days later, a thin file was placed on his desk. He read it silently. Grace had been abused by her ex-boyfriend for years. She had left, fled to New York, changed her phone number, changed her job. For a time, she had lost her voice completely, from shock and fear. Ethan closed the file, his eyes darkening. Anger, sympathy, guilt, they all mixed together into a heavy weight in his chest. He didn't know what to do. That evening, while Grace was washing dishes in the kitchen, Ethan approached her. He didn't hold any files or bring up the past. He just said, "You don't need to tell me anything. I just want you to know that you're not alone anymore." Grace stood still. The water in the tub continued to flow, the trickling sound seeming to match the rapid heartbeats of the two people. After a while, she softly replied, "You shouldn't care too much. Everyone has their own past." "Yes," he said, "but the past shouldn't be allowed to torment anyone forever." His voice wasn't loud, but it was enough to make her shoulders shake. She turned away, tears falling, mingling with the running water. In that moment, Ethan realized the silence she had kept for so long was not out of pride, but out of fear that if she spoke out, she would lose the fragile peace she had. He didn't touch her. He just stood behind her, close enough so she knew he wasn't going to leave. That night, Noah woke up in the middle of the night. He walked out into the hallway, saw the light coming from the kitchen. He looked at the two adults standing in silence, and in a very childish but instinctive way, Noah ran over, took Grace's hand, then his father's, and pulled them close. No one said anything, but in that silence, something very real was happening, as if the three had just made a silent pact that, from now on, they would not let pain tear them apart again. Outside, the rain fell again, but this time, Ethan didn't find it cold. He only heard his son's steady breathing, Grace's soft sobs, and his own heartbeat, for the first time in years, beating in sync with two other people's. Monday morning. The soft, yellow sunlight fell on the stone steps. The air in the ward house was no longer as quiet as before. Soft laughter came from the kitchen, a child's and a woman's laughter. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching silently. Grace was teaching Noah to beat eggs. Flour was all over the table, and the boy giggled when she accidentally spilled milk on his hand. "See, cooking is an art," she said, her voice tinged with amusement. Noah nodded, his lips curving up. Ethan said nothing, just smiled, a rare smile, one the old maid had said they hadn't seen in almost a year. He sat down at the dining table, looked at the two of them, and realized that this feeling, warm, close, was something he hadn't had in a long time. That morning, for the first time, the three of them ate breakfast together, and for the first time, Noah told a story in a few short sentences. "I want to go to the garden today," he said. His voice was hoarse but clear. Grace looked at Ethan, her eyes lighting up. He nodded slightly. "Let's go to the garden." The backyard, once desolate and overgrown with weeds, now had daisies and a small tomato patch under Grace's care. Ethan sat on a wooden bench, watching his son run around, laughing when he caught a butterfly. In that moment, Ethan felt like he was released from the invisible cage that had imprisoned him for months. He remembered the first time he met Grace, the small woman with the reserved eyes, and wondered how did she make his whole world move again that afternoon while Noah slept. Ethan walked out into the garden. Grace was watering the plants, her shirt slightly damp with dew. He approached and whispered, "Thank you for doing what I couldn't." Grace looked up and smiled. "I only did what I believed was right. What do you believe in?" She thought for a moment, then replied, "I believe that all children need to be seen. Even if they don't speak, they are calling out to someone who will listen." Ethan was silent. The words made his heart ache. For months, he had lived with his son, but had never really seen him. That evening, he stopped by Noah's room. The boy was sleeping, still clutching his teddy bear. On the table was a new painting, 3 people standing together under a large tree, with the sun above and the scrawled words, "Home." Ethan looked at him for a long time, then sat down and gently stroked his son's hair. A tear slid down his face, but this time it wasn't pain, it was gratitude. The next day, Grace suggested the 3 of them go outside. "Noah needs some fresh air," she said. Ethan agreed, and they drove to a small park along Candlewood Lake. The sky was blue, the wind was light, the water was calm. Grace spread out a picnic blanket and took out cookies and fruit. Noah ran around, throwing leaves and laughing. Ethan looked at the scene and suddenly felt his heart beat strangely. He could no longer see the distance between past and present. Grace sat down beside him, her hand accidentally brushing his. They both paused, then laughed. No words needed to be said. It was all too obvious. In the afternoon, when they returned, the sky began to cloud over. A light rain fell. Ethan opened the car door for Noah, then turned to look at Grace. Her hair was wet, but her smile was bright. "You're all wet," he said. "It's okay. I like the rain," she replied, her voice soft. "It makes everything more real." He looked at her for a long time, his eyes softening. "Grace," he said, "if one day you want to leave, I will understand. But I hope you know that. Here, you did what no one else could. You brought us back to life." She didn't answer right away. She just looked at him with deep eyes. Then softly said Ethan, "Sometimes we can't save people. We just stay by their side long enough for them to save themselves." That sentence made him silent. That night, when Noah was asleep, Ethan walked out onto the porch and saw Grace sitting reading a book under the dim light. He brought her a cup of tea. "Aren't you sleeping, No? I'm afraid that if I sleep, I'll wake up tomorrow and find that all of this was just a dream." Grace smiled softly, her voice warm. "If this is a dream, I don't want to wake up." Both were silent, the sound of the rain falling steadily, blending with the slow beat of their hearts. A long moment passed. Then Ethan said, "I thought I couldn't love anyone again after losing Clara, but now I realize love doesn't disappear. It just changes form. It can be my child's smile, your voice, a rainy afternoon like this." Grace looked at him, her eyes shining, her lips trembling. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered. "Just keep going like this." Ethan nodded, then gently placed his hand on her desk. Not squeezing, just touching it lightly, enough to feel real warmth. That night, Noah's laughter echoed softly through the walls of his dreams. Ethan and Grace sat silently, staring at the half-closed door, where warm yellow light filtered in, like a small promise that tomorrow's dawn would be different. The next morning, when he woke up, Noah had already made milk and set the table. He whispered, "I want to make a cake for Grace." Ethan looked at his son and smiled. "Let's do it together." The kitchen erupted in laughter again. Flour was everywhere, Noah had butter on his cheek, and Ethan was clumsy and ridiculous. Grace walked in, saw the scene, and laughed a hearty laugh Ethan knew he would never forget. She never realized that, in this house, just one child's smile would make all the walls collapse. Ethan looked at the two of them and said softly, "I think it's been a long time since this house has truly had laughter." Grace replied softly, "And laughter is the most beautiful music of resurrection." The three of them sat down, ate the hot muffins, and listened to the rain pattering on the porch. There was no music, no need for prayers, just the belief that, whatever tomorrow brought, they had found what they had long thought was lost, the warmth of home. It was a misty Saturday morning. The lake behind the house was covered in a thin layer of smoke, reflecting the pale light of the approaching winter. Ethan was making coffee when the doorbell rang. It was a normal sound, but in the silence it made him a little uneasy. Grace was painting with Noah in the living room. When the door opened, a man stood there tall, with a scraggly beard, his eyes strange and heavy. "Excuse me," Ethan asked. "Who are you looking for?" The man curled his lips. "Grace Miller. She's here. Right." The whole house froze for a moment. Grace heard the sound. Her whole body shook. The pencil fell from her hand. Noah looked at her, bewildered. Ethan turned back, seeing her face pale. "Who is it?" "Grace." The man took a step forward and smiled faintly. "I am Michael. We used to be husband and wife." Ethan felt a punch in the chest. He looked at Grace. She didn't deny it. Her lip trembled, her eyes brimming with tears. "He almost killed me once," she said softly. The air in the room seemed thick. Ethan stood in front of her. "I think you should go." Michael raised his eyebrows and smiled faintly. "Do you think you can keep her? She belongs to me. The law has never changed." Ethan clenched his fists, his voice low. "No one belongs to anyone." But Michael didn't listen. He pushed past him, his eyes daggers. "You think you can hide forever?" Grace Noah was scared, holding her hand tightly. Ethan stepped forward, pushing Michael away. "Get out of my house." The impact sent the coffee cup crashing to the table, shattering. Noah cried out. Grace stood between them, her shoulders shaking. "Please, don't do this. There are children here." Michael glanced at Noah, then curled his lips. "You even take care of his child. You're really good at replacing others." The words were like a knife stabbing into Ethan's heart. But he didn't react, just clenched his fist until it bled. "Finally!" Grace shouted. "Go away! Michael, I'm not afraid of you anymore." The whole room shook with the scream. Michael paused for a second, then sneered, "You'll regret it." He walked away, leaving the door slamming and the cold air rushing in. No one said anything. Ethan looked at Grace. She was shaking, tears streaming down her face. Noah was still clutching her leg, his face dirty. Ethan stepped closer and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to be scared. I'll take care of everything." She shook her head and whispered, "You don't understand. Michael is someone who knows how to make people disappear." Ethan looked deep into her eyes. "If he comes back, I will stand between you two. Do you trust me?" Grace was silent, but in those wet eyes, for the first time, there was a small ray of light, of faith. That evening, Ethan called his friend in private security. He asked to check Michael's records and assigned 2 guards around the house. When things calmed down, he returned to the living room. Grace sat there, a cup of tea in her hand, her eyes staring blankly outside. Are you okay?" "I thought I had forgotten," she whispered, but just hearing his voice brings it all back. "I used to think if I kept quiet long enough, the past would fade away, but it doesn't fade away, just waiting for the chance to come back." Ethan sat down beside her. "Some things just disappear when you face them, and this time, you're not alone." She looked up at him, as if she wanted to say something, but tears welled up in her eyes. He said nothing more, just pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. She shivered, then gradually relaxed, letting his warmth surround her. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He checked every window, every lock, as if even a crack could let the past in. The next morning, Grace asked for a few days off, saying she wanted to get away to clear her head. Ethan was hesitant, but he understood, sometimes, to heal, one needs to be alone. She left with her small bag. Noah stood at the door, watching her. "Will you be back?" he asked, his voice worried. Grace bent down and hugged him. "I promise. I will be back soon," as her car drove away. Ethan stood silently on the porch for a long time. He knew this was the decisive moment. If Grace didn't come back, the house would fall silent again. 3 days passed, no call, no text. Ethan called security. They said her phone signal had been dead since the night before. His heart stopped. She was being followed. The team member said, "We found traces of Michael's car near the boarding house where she used to live." Ethan didn't think. He drove away into the night, filled with fear and anger like never before. It was raining heavily, and the road was slippery. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the blurry signs. Finally, he stopped in front of an old warehouse outside Newark. The door was ajar, and a dim light shone out. He walked in, his heart pounding. In the middle of the empty room, Grace was tied to a chair, her hair disheveled, her face red and swollen. Michael was standing next to her, smiling coldly. "Here he is," he said. "Your hero." Ethan lunged, but Michael drew his knife. Steel flashed, but Ethan didn't stop. His blow knocked them both down. Metal clanged against the floor. Grace screamed, trying to break free. The struggle was short, but fierce. Ethan's shoulder was torn. Blood soaked his shirt, but eventually he got a firm grip on Michael's wrist. "Get out of her life," he roared, his voice echoing in the empty space. Police sirens blared outside. Security had tracked his location from his phone. Michael was subdued and dragged out screaming. Grace collapsed, her eyes panicked. Ethan rushed over, untied her, and pulled her into his arms. "It's okay," he whispered. "No one can hurt you anymore." She choked, unable to speak. Her trembling hand touched his wound. "You're hurt." He smiled, light as the wind. "It's just a scratch. You're the one who needs to be taken care of." She looked at him, her eyes filled with tears, then suddenly hugged him tightly. "I thought I was used to fear, but when I saw you rush in, I was afraid of losing another person." He tightened his arms. "You won't lose anyone else, I promise." Outside, the rain was still falling heavily, but in those arms something had been released. Not just her fear, but all the years she had spent hiding from herself. That night, when they returned home, Noah ran out and hugged her, sobbing. "Grace, I thought you were never coming back." Grace knelt down and hugged him. "I promised. Remember, I'd always come back." Ethan looked at the two of them, feeling a strange feeling in his heart. Gratitude, relief, and a little pain. He knew that things would never be the same from here on out, but perhaps that was a good thing. A week after the incident, the Ward house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet, deeper, more real, no longer the lurking fear, but the breathing of people who had just survived a great storm and were learning to believe in peace. In the morning, a light snow fell on the roof. Noah ran around the garden, catching the first snowflakes of the season. His laughter echoed so clearly that Ethan stood on the porch, smiling silently. Inside, Grace sat by the window, a cup of hot tea in her hand, her eyes distant. Even though she was safe, she still couldn't sleep through the night. Sometimes, the sound of the wind whistling outside the window would startle her. But now, every time she opened her eyes, she saw the warm light in the hallway. Ethan was always awake, reading or working, but she knew he was awake to comfort her. Ethan came home early that afternoon. He brought a bouquet of white tulips. Grace was a little surprised when she saw them. "For you," he said. "Clara used to love tulips, but today I think they should go to someone else, someone who brings a new light to this house." Grace gently accepted the flowers, her heart filled with mixed emotions. "You didn't have to do that. I didn't do it because I needed to." Ethan replied, "I did it because I wanted to." She looked at him, her eyes softening slightly. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything." He chuckled. "Just stay." That afternoon, as the weak sunlight filtered through the trees, Grace and Noah made cookies in the kitchen. Laughter filled the air. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, quietly observing. For the first time, he noticed that everything in the house had its own rhythm: the stirring of flour, the clinking of spoons. Noah asking, "Ma'am, do you have more sugar?" all creating a simple melody that he had forgotten he enjoyed. When the cake was done, the aroma filled the kitchen. Grace placed a plate in front of him. "Try it." Ethan took a bite and grimaced. "Too sweet." Grace laughed, because Noah doubled the sugar. The boy giggled, revealing his missing tooth. Ethan watched the scene, a simple feeling of happiness flooding over him, an emotion he thought he would never experience again. That night, after Noah had fallen asleep, Ethan and Grace sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the snowfall. The golden light from the living room bathed them in a soft, warm glow. "Aren't you going back to the company?" Grace asked. "I've been back enough," he replied. "There are things more important than money. Like what? Like here. Like this peace. Like you." Grace turned away slightly, her lip trembling. "Don't say that. Ethan, things between us maybe shouldn't be like this." "Why not?" he asked, his voice low. "Because I'm still not healed," she whispered. "I don't want to be the one you have to keep saving." Ethan looked at her, his eyes soft. "Grace, you were never the one who needed saving. You saved me, and my son." The silence stretched on. The snow pattered on the eaves. She pursed her lips, looking straight at him. "Ethan, are you ever afraid of falling in love again?" He thought for a moment, then answered slowly, "Yes, scared to the point of trembling, but I'm more afraid of losing the chance to love." She shed a few tears, but this time it wasn't because of pain. "I don't know if I can love again, but I do know. I don't want to run away anymore." He smiled. "That's enough." That night, they said nothing more. They just sat there, listening to the wind and feeling the warmth from the same blanket. A few days later, Grace started teaching again at the children's center near her home. Ethan took her to her first day. As the car pulled up, she turned to him and said, "Thank you for letting me be me." "No," he replied. "Thank you for giving me a reason to change." In the days that followed, life settled down. Noah went to school and did well. Grace returned to her favorite job. Ethan still ran the company, but spent more time at home. One afternoon, he was surprised to see Noah holding an old phone, showing a video of the family of 3 playing in the yard. The boy's voice rang out softly, "I miss Mom, but I think she would like Grace." Ethan froze. He knelt down and hugged his son. "You know, your mother once told me that. True love never ends. It just finds a new form to exist." The boy nodded, then ran out into the snow. That night, Ethan sat at his desk, opening an old photo of Clara. Her eyes were gentle as if she was smiling. He said softly, "I think you will agree with me this time." Light footsteps sounded on the porch. Grace appeared, carrying 2 cups of hot cocoa. "Are you talking to her?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Clara once said that if you ever smile genuinely again, it means you've saved the best part of her." Grace was silent, then put her hand on his shoulder. "I think she would be proud." They looked at each other without needing words. The flickering candlelight reflected in their eyes. Outside, the snow was still falling, but it was no longer cold, only peaceful. Ethan stood up and opened the window. A cold wind rushed in, carrying the scent of snowgrass. He took a deep breath, then turned and said, "Grace, we've been through a lot to get here. I don't know what the future holds, but if you want, I want to rebuild things with you and Noah not the way they were, but our way." Grace looked at him, her eyes sparkling. "Are you sure I'm not perfect?" "Nobody's perfect," he said, "but I believe that the broken ones are the ones who love the most." She smiled, tears falling. "Ethan." He took her hand and squeezed it gently. "Just call me Ethan, like you always do." Outside, Noah's voice called out, "Daddy, Auntie, it's snowing heavily. Come out and play." They looked at each other and laughed. At that moment, all the pain in the past seemed to melt away into the white breath of winter. Grace took his hand and walked outside, letting the snow cover her hair and shoulders. Noah laughed loudly, throwing snow into the air. Ethan gently put his arm around her shoulder, said nothing, just bowed his head slightly to her ear and whispered, "This is home." The light from the house behind shone out, warm and golden in the night, and in the midst of that scene, 3 people stood together, imperfect but complete in their own way. It was early December, and the backyard was covered in snow. The Christmas lights on the porch were twinkling, reflecting off the warm glass windows. Soft music was playing in the living room. Grace had played Silent Night, the melody familiar but so gentle. Noah sat on the floor, wrapping the presents with great care. He carefully tied ribbons and labels, then looked up at Grace. "I made this for Dad, for you, and for Clara. Mom needs a present too." "Right." Grace paused. Ethan, who was decorating the tree, paused too. He looked at her, his eyes softening. "Yes," he said, his voice soft. "Your mother deserves a gift. What are you going to get?" "Her." Noah thought for a moment and replied, "I drew a picture. Dad, me, Grace." And Mom looked down from the sky. The room was silent for a moment. Grace bowed her head slightly, her eyes sparkling. Ethan moved closer and patted his son's head. "Mommy would love to see you do that." That afternoon, the snow fell harder. Ethan lit the fireplace, and the smell of burning wood filled the house. Grace made cocoa and set 3 cups on the table. The 3 of them sat around the fireplace, listening to the wind whistling outside. "Dad," Noah suddenly asked, "was Mom in a lot of pain?" The simple question was like a small knife that touched the deepest part of Ethan's heart. He was silent. Grace looked at him with worried eyes. Ethan put down his cup of cocoa, looked into the fire, his voice hoarse. "Yes, son. Your mother was hurt, but she always hid it so you wouldn't have to worry. She was stronger than anything I've ever known." Noah tilted his head, his eyes innocent and deep. "So, who hurt Mom?" "Dad." The room was so quiet you could hear the snow falling outside. Ethan took a deep breath, his hands clenching. He looked at his son, then at Grace. She nodded slightly, as if to say, "Tell the truth," but with kindness. Ethan said slowly, "Sometimes we don't need anyone to hurt us. It's fear, loss, and even unspoken love that can hurt our hearts. My mother's gone, but her love never died. It stays in me." Noah was silent for a long moment, then nodded. "Like when I was scared and Grace held me, and I saw Mom there." Ethan smiled slightly, tears glistening in the firelight. "Yes, Noah, that's it." Grace looked at the father and son, her heart aching. She had thought she was not qualified to be in this family. But then she realized, sometimes, the most broken people are the ones destined to heal each other. After that evening, Ethan spent more time writing. He no longer wrote to the company, but wrote letters. Letters to Clara, to himself, to his son. Grace found them in a small wooden box on his desk. "If there is a next life, I will learn to love without fear of loss." One morning, Grace called Noah into the kitchen. "Can you do me a favor?" "Yes." She handed him an envelope. "Let's mail this letter to Clara's mother. Remember, by the maple tree in the backyard, where Dad used to sit." Noah nodded and ran off. He gently dug through the snow, put the envelope down, and said softly, "Mommy, this is a letter from Grace. She told you not to worry, because Daddy and I are okay now." Grace stood behind, silently wiping away her tears. Ethan stepped forward and draped his jacket over her shoulders. "Did you do that?" he asked. "I just wanted Clara to know that her love is still alive, in you two." Ethan looked at her for a long time, then softly said, "Thank you for not replacing us, but for continuing with us." On Christmas Eve, the Wards had a small party. It was quiet, just the 3 of them. Candlelight and a glowing Christmas tree. At the top of the tree, Noah hung a paper star with the words scrawled, "For Mom, from us." As the clock struck 9, it began to snow heavily. Grace and Ethan sat side by side, Noah dozing off on the couch. Ethan said softly, "You know, I used to think love ended when someone left, but now I understand. Love just changes form, from presence to protection, from words to silence." Grace nodded, her voice trembling. "And sometimes it comes back through a child." Ethan looked at her, smiling warmly. "Grace, after all, I want to ask this, not out of obligation, but out of desire. Do you want to stay here? Forever?" Grace was silent. She looked around, the once cold house now warm, Noah's paintings, the soft sound of the wind outside. It all seemed to answer her. "Ethan," she said softly, "I don't know what will happen, but if I can, I want to be here. Not because I'm afraid of being alone, but because this is where my heart started beating again." He squeezed her hand, the firelight reflecting in their eyes. No promises needed. Just that look was enough. Outside, the snow was still falling, blanketing the garden where the boy had buried the letter to his mother. A gentle breeze blew, and a small envelope lifted from the snow, opening to reveal a few lines written by Grace in a trembling hand. Clara, if you're listening, I want to say thank you, because your love kept them alive, so I could help them love again. The next morning, when Noah woke up, he ran out into the garden and shouted, "Daddy!" Auntie Mommy answered, in the snow. There was no envelope, only a single white tulip growing in the middle of winter. Impossible. But there it was, bloomin' pure. Ethan stood still, holding Grace's hand. He whispered, "Maybe she's forgiven." Noah held their hands, his eyes shining. "Mom doesn't hurt anymore." "Right." Dad, Ethan, bent down and held his son close, his voice choked. "No, baby, Mom doesn't hurt anymore, and from today, neither do we." The three of them stood there in the middle of a snowy garden. The first rays of the New Year's sunlight shone down, sparkling on the lone tulip. It was like a final message: love never dies. It just moves on to continue healing the hearts that remain. The story of Who Hurt You. Mommy is not only a family tragedy, but also a gentle reminder that we all have invisible wounds. Ethan lost his wife and learned to be a father through silence. Grace survived abuse and learned to love again through trust. And Noah, the silent boy, teaches them that true love needs no words, just a heart that listens. The most profound message is no one is perfect, but everyone deserves to be loved and to start over. When we dare to face the past, dare to open our hearts despite fear, we not only save others, but we are also saving ourselves. For adult audiences, this story evokes years of loss, of closure, only to realize that we can still love again, gently, but deeply enough to heal a lifetime. Thank you for accompanying this story. If you also believe in the power of kindness, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to spread stories that touch the heart, where every tear carries a ray of hope